How is this really going to affect your relationship and future fights for him?
Jon Jones has been one of these guys who, as much as he's won in all the things that he's accomplished in a short amount of time. Like he burst onto the scene a year and a half ago. He's ripped through the top guys. He's been a champion that hasn't been very popular, and I don't think that this is going to do wonders for his popularity.
Good luck.
One of the most popular pop culture icons of all time is the comic book villain, the Joker. In the past 20 years alone, he has seen no less than 4 portrayals in blockbuster films, and 2 of those performances have garnered Academy Awards and numerous other acting accolades for the actor portraying him. One of those Oscar winners, Heath Ledger, portrayed the character as smart, cunning, darkly hilarious, resourceful, and mysterious. He overshadowed everyone in the film, including the title character. He completely changed the outlook of what a superhero villain could be defined as in the media landscape. The fact that Heath Ledger passed before he could see the influence and the cultural impact his portrayal of the villain would have is both tragic and adds a layer of curiosity as to what could have been, as when he passed, he took all of the Joker's secrets with him. The Dark Knight came out in the summer of 2008 and completely changed the face of the blockbuster film. Someone who also made a debut in the summer of 2008 and eventually changed the face of MMA was one Jonathan Dwight Jones and his entrance into the UFC promotion. Like Heath Ledger's Joker, there was very little we knew about Jon Jones, as he had only made his professional MMA debut less than 4 months before entering the octagon. He also showed a level of composure that few men his age had, and knowledge of the fight game that few with his lack of combat experience would. Within 3 years, Jones was good enough to fight for, and easily win, the light heavyweight title. After his title victory, UFC President Dana White gave some of the most poignant words of caution towards the young champion that even he likely didn't know would resonate as much as it did throughout the years.
Jon Jones got through a tough test tonight and passed with flying colors. The real challenge starts now. He seems to be a grounded kid, smart guy, has a good family around him and people that, care about him. So hopefully he can get through the nastiness that's going to come at him.
Jones was everything the UFC was looking for in a champion. Young, good-looking, well-spoken, exciting inside the cage, and classy outside of it. At the time, Dana White's words of caution seemed more like overzealous concern. Oh, how fooled we were. In 2019, the Joker had his own standalone film and was played by Joaquin Phoenix, who also won an Oscar for his portrayal. But this wasn't the Joker that Heath Ledger popularized. In many ways, he was the antithesis. This Joker wasn't a mystery. We knew his name, Arthur Fleck, and he wasn't smart, cunning, resourceful, or even funny. Arthur Fleck was a miserable and mentally ill nobody who lived with his mother, who nobody took seriously and was only threatening when he had a gun. By 2019, Jon Jones had an extensive criminal record, had been stripped of his title multiple times, and had lost years of his prime by failing numerous drug tests for PEDs. By 2025, he had burned every bridge possible on a professional level, and most fans would prefer if he had just gone away. A portrayal of the Joker that fused the concept of the confident villain and the lowly loser within the same man was in Alan Moore's classic one-shot graphic novel, The Killing Joke. This story famously showcased an origin story for the evil clown, wherein before he became the titular villain, he was just a desperate unemployed man trying to provide for his pregnant wife while following his dreams of becoming a comedian. How he went from a pathetic failure to the clown prince of darkness was summarized by the man himself in a famous quote, "All it takes is one bad day." And in my opinion, for Jon Jones, the process of going from the UFC's poster child to his eventual path of debauchery and career sabotage began with a canceled pay-per-view card and a media phone call. But there is a much, much deeper story to tell before we get there. In August of 2008, while 21-year-old Jon Jones was making his UFC debut, 38-year-old Dan Henderson was preparing for a make-or-break fight in his professional fighting career. A year and a half previously, in February 2007, Hendo had just secured the most important win of his career, knocking out Wanderlei Silva to become the final Pride middleweight champion. A little over a year prior to that, Hendo had also won the Pride welterweight Grand Prix, becoming Pride's only double champion. Now, Pride's weight classes and UFC's weight classes were a little different. Welterweight in Pride was essentially a UFC middleweight at the weight limit of 183 pounds, and middleweight in Pride was essentially a UFC light heavyweight, as the weight limit for both was 205. This allowed Dan Henderson to enter the UFC with immediate title shots at both light heavyweight and middleweight. Unfortunately, he lost both of those fights. He was outmuscled by the much larger man in Rampage Jackson in his bid for the UFC light heavyweight title at UFC 75, a rare example of a numbered card happening on free TV, and he was outclassed by the much faster and skilled submission artist in Anderson Silva at UFC 82 for the middleweight title. Now, that one was on pay-per-view. If Henderson had decided to call it a career at that point, he would still be considered an MMA pioneer and a legend of Pride FC. In 2008, Dan had been competing in MMA for 11 years. He had numerous wrestling accolades and championships, and even represented the United States in wrestling in both the 1992 and 1996 Summer Olympics. Initially, his entry into MMA was met with little fanfare. He heavily relied on his Greco-Roman background, and many of his fights would go to decision, giving him the dubious nickname of Decision Dan. He even won a split decision against a young Carlos Newton to win the middleweight tournament at UFC 17, before eventually finding his way to Pride in 2000 with 9 MMA fights. After losing a decision to Wanderlei Silva in his first fight with the promotion, in his second fight against Renzo Gracie, he found his secret sauce, the H-bomb. Hendo would still trade losses here and there within Pride, but the legend of Hendo and his explosive right hand would continue to grow throughout the years within the promotion, which would lead him to winning the welterweight Grand Prix in 2005 and ending his tenure in Pride by avenging his first loss in it, absolutely nuking Wanderlei Silva and sending him crashing to the canvas at Pride 33. The fire to compete was still within Dan, however, and he entered the UFC with 2 fellow Pride vets in Quentin Rampage Jackson and Anderson Silva as champions to challenge. As mentioned before, he definitively lost to both. And now in August of 2008, he was less than a month away from fighting a 28-year-old Husamar Palhares at middleweight. Was this the end for the 38-year-old? Not even close. Hendo proved the H-bomb wasn't out of gas, beating Palhares by defending all of the grappler's heel hook attempts and dropping him on numerous occasions en route to a unanimous decision win. He then headlined at UFC 93 against former middleweight champion Rich Franklin at light heavyweight and had a closely contested split decision win there. And while Dan was now riding a 2-fight winning streak, his true statement win to reassert himself back into the talks of title contention occurred later that year when he completely separated Michael Bisping's soul from his body at UFC 100. A cathartic moment that had long been coming, as Henderson and Bisping had been coaches on Season 9 of The Ultimate Fighter prior to their fight, and Bisping had purposefully played the heel, antagonizing Hendo at every chance he had. Hendo's KO of Bisping, while iconic, ended up leading to a contract dispute between Henderson and the UFC, with Dan rightfully wanting to capitalize on his increased popularity, while the UFC played typical hardball. This would lead to Henderson signing with the UFC's strongest competitor at the time in Strikeforce. He stumbled walking in just like he did in Pride and in his title fights in the UFC, losing to Jake Shields in an underwhelming middleweight title fight, although he almost finished Shields multiple times in the first round. But after that he went on a tear, eventually becoming their light heavyweight champion and defeating the legendary heavyweight Fedor Emelianenko at nearly 41 years old in 2011. By this time, Jon Jones was already the light heavyweight champion in the UFC, having destroyed another Pride veteran in Mauricio Shogun Rua to claim it just a few months prior at UFC 128. One of the dream matchups Pride fans never got to see was Dan Henderson versus Shogun Rua. And thankfully, after Henderson knocked out Fedor and Shogun had a rebound win against Forrest Griffin shortly after at UFC 134, Henderson would re-sign with the UFC, and his opponent would be none other than Shogun Rua. So what was Jones doing all that time while Hendo was reclaiming glory? I don't think it needs to be repeated how quickly and dominantly Jones rose to power, with his ascension culminating in his absolutely dominant 2011, where he would capture the UFC title and defend it twice. There's a much more interesting story about Jones to be told during this time frame, and leads to an interesting dynamic to how Jones and Hendo both left the year of 2011. One of the aspects of Heath Ledger's Joker that is seldom brought up while discussing his character is that for how smart, cunning, and chaotic he is, he shows himself to be very insecure and prideful on multiple occasions. He hates being called crazy.
You're crazy. I'm not. No, I'm not.
Hates being proven wrong, and above all else, hates losing control.
Look at me. Look at me!
All the moments where he shows poise and calmness under pressure are instances where he is already fully in control, and usually Batman and the audience just don't know it at the time. Throughout the first 3 years of his tenure with the UFC, Jones seemed to be the absolute face of professionalism, a squeaky clean product in a violent sport while still managing to be entertaining and endearing. Maybe it was being inspired by how the fanbase connected to George St. Pierre, and how his persona countered the perception and stereotype of what a fighter was supposed to look and act like. The two did train together at Greg Jackson's after all. On the surface level, this seemed all well and good, but there always seemed to be something off about Jones. There was something about him that just seemed a bit rehearsed. And not in the manner solely for fight promotion purposes, but as a human being as well. If you look back on Jones' history even before joining the UFC, there were already some inconsistencies with the person he was presenting himself to be within the promotion. His original fight nickname before Bones was Sexual Chocolate,
aka Sexual Chocolate Jones!
and he showed a level of arrogant and cocky behavior in his regional fights.
I think it's cocky behavior. I think he should leave that outside the ring before he gets in here, in my opinion.
And even his reason for getting into MMA to begin with was due to him getting his girlfriend pregnant and needing to financially support a family. None of those things are necessarily bad or nefarious, but do contradict the sweet, innocent Christian man Jones was portraying himself to be in his first few years in the UFC.
I have an after party tonight, but I definitely won't be drinking. It's right back to the drawing board.
This was Jones controlling the narrative of his life and his career. He even helped stop a robbery the day of his first title fight in March of 2011. This was a culmination of marketing perfection. Unfortunately for Jones, the cracks in this facade would already start to form immediately after his first title win. Jones' first title challenger was announced to be now former training partner Rashad Evans, the man who was originally supposed to fight Shogun for the title but pulled out due to injury. Evans knew Jones on a level that the public didn't, and you could see it in Jones' eyes when Rashad and him faced off immediately after John's title win. But their fight would be delayed due to multiple injury and injury conspiracies on both men's parts. The fans were already starting to view John a little differently when the fight didn't happen due to Jones claiming injury, but he would then immediately proceed to book a title fight against Rampage Jackson for September 2011 at UFC 135, immediately after Evans had a fight booked in August, a fight in which Evans would legitimately injure his hand, delaying his and John's fight further. Aside from some claims from Rampage that Jones had a spy in his training camp, the real controversy that arose from Jones versus Rampage was how Jones decided to approach their fight inside the octagon. Jones repeatedly stuck his fingers in Rampage's face, preventing Rampage from closing distance for fear of an eye poke, something Jones would become infamous for. Jones also employed oblique kicks to Rampage's knee, hyperextending it and hurting Jackson's movement, a technique that would become criticized and debated on for years to come. Jones submitted Rampage that night, but it wasn't without criticism that has lasted for over a decade at this point. In almost a way that could be seen to counter this negative attention, Jones would book another title fight very shortly after against fan favorite Lyoto Machida for that December at UFC 140. The pay-per-view that was to occur before that one was none other than Dan Henderson versus Shogun at UFC 139.
Now, I tried to finish him a couple times. I think tired me out a little bit. He tried to Rocky Balboa me early on. Wore me out with his head.
This is Dan Henderson after his fight with Mauricio Shogun Rua. UFC 139 had already been an absolutely insane card, but the main event between Dan Henderson and Shogun Rua surpassed anything fans thought it could have been. Dan Henderson rocked and knocked down Shogun numerous times in the first 3 rounds. Shogun rallied and nearly finished Hendo multiple times on the ground in the 4th and 5th rounds. The two men gave everything they had. Dan Henderson returned to the UFC with thunderous applause and fanfare. The 41-year-old won the decision, but neither man really lost that fight. It was announced that Dan Henderson would get a title shot after Rashad Evans finally got his long overdue opportunity. And let's be fair, it would be quite a minute before Dan Henderson would be healthy enough to compete again. Hendo left UFC 139 with a few years taken off his life, but with an amount of adoration that would last for the rest of his career. and likely for the rest of his life. Someone still seeking that kind of adoration was Jon Jones. While he was the youngest champion in UFC history, and had already defended his title against a legend in the sport, his actions had caused his reception to be lukewarm at this point.
I need to be more careful with the words that I say because of the level of the way I get scrutinized for any little thing that happens.
Jon was looking to steer that ship into warmer waters with a quick turnaround title fight against Lyoto Machida, who was coming off a knockout of the year against Randy Couture, in which he landed the Karate Kid crane kick that knocked a tooth out of Randy's mouth. Stylistically, people were very intrigued by this fight, as they wondered how Jones would be able to use his reach and size to counter Machida's elusive and tricky counter-striking. And in the first round, those fans were not disappointed. Jones struggled to get his hands on Machida, while Lyoto darted in and out, even catching Jon off guard and sending him backwards, arguably rocking him. Jones returned to his corner wide-eyed, concerned, and at a loss, immediately asking his coach Greg Jackson if he had won the round. This was a make-or-break moment for Jones. This was the first time Jon had ever faced adversity inside the cage. It's true that he technically lost a fight before, but that was due to disqualification by caving his opponent's head in the wrong way. This was Jones' moment. This was how he earned the love and adoration of the fans. This was how he showed heart. And he was this close to winning that love. Jones rallied and managed to take Lyoto down in the second round, immediately opening up a massive cut on Lyoto's forehead with one of his patented elbow strikes. When the fight returned to the feet, Jones rocked Machida with an overhand that dropped the Brazilian. Jones took his window of opportunity and locked in an absolutely devastating headlock choke that almost instantly put Machida out. It was amazing, beyond impressive. Jones' evolution in his skill set and his ability to adapt within a fight were undeniable now. But what happened in the next couple of minutes overshadowed all of it. Jones dropped Machida's unconscious body to the ground immediately after the fight was called off like a sack of potatoes. Lyoto's eyes eerily rolled in the back of his head. Jones coldly walked away from his fallen opponent. While admittedly an iconic moment, Lyoto Machida was a beloved fan favorite at the time. For Jones to apparently disregard and coldly dismiss his adored fallen foe wasn't going to earn him any love from the hardcore audience, and one man that understood that was his coach Greg Jackson. At some point in the aftermath of the fight, you could hear a heavily muffled Jackson yelling at Jones.
And he remains the UFC light heavyweight champion.
And nearly immediately afterwards, Jones awkwardly ran over to Machida, who was slowly coming back to consciousness, and briefly interacted with him. The next day, a curious and tech-savvy fan managed to isolate what Greg Jackson said. And let's just say it didn't really help paint a different picture of Jones than what many fans had already began to sketch onto his canvas.
Jon, go check on him! Go check on him! Go check on Lyoto, get some fans!
Jones was immediately coming off of the most impressive win in his career so far, a clean and respectful win after the mixed reaction to his fight with Rampage, and all it took was him dropping his opponent after an amazing submission, and for his coach to expose Jon's insecurity about his image to nearly burn it all down. Dan Henderson ended his 2011 winning the Strikeforce Championship, knocking out arguably the greatest heavyweight of all time, and having one of the greatest fights of all time, earning a UFC light heavyweight title shot, and becoming one of the most beloved fighters in the sport. Jon Jones himself technically had the superior year, winning a #1 contender fight against a fellow hot prospect in Ryan Bader, defeating Shogun himself in much more impressive fashion than Henderson did to gain the light heavyweight title, and dominantly defended it against two legends and former champions of the sport in Rampage Jackson and Lyoto Machida. Jones's 2011 might be the single greatest year for any fighter in MMA history, but he didn't win the one thing he truly wanted.
I wasn't the best because I killed quickly. I was the best because the crowd loved me.
And a former training partner was about to expose him further. While Dan Henderson healed up and prepared for his looming title shot, Jon Jones and Rashad Evans finally settled the score in April of 2012 at UFC 145, and what many anticipated to be a barn burner between the two former training partners ended up being the first Jon Jones title fight you could potentially call boring. Jones brilliantly used elbows and ranged kickboxing to keep Evans away from him, leading to a clear unanimous decision for Jones. The more interesting juice we squeezed out of that fight was the build-up. While the majority of it was pretty standard former friends turned to enemies banter, during one exchange between the two former friends, Evans said something very insightful about Jones that only someone who knew him very well could express.
You lose a fight, you will change the person who you are. You won't be the same person.
I won't.
Because you know why?
I won't.
Your fabric is fake. Be who you say you are.
I am who I say I am.
No, you know.
I am who I say I am.
I know.
Did I say I was perfect? Did I say I was an
You don't
angel?
gotta be perfect.
Are you
But
perfect?
just don't be fraudulent.
In another interview closer to the fight, Evans doubled down on his assessment of Jones's character.
And I just say what I say about him being fake because Jon is not the person that, you know, he says he is or tries to pretend he is to be.
In the immediate aftermath of the fight, this could be disregarded as little more than mental mind games on the part of Rashad. But nearly an exact month later, what Evans said about Jones's character would begin to pay dividends.
He's setting himself up for a fall I don't think he can take right now.
At some point early in his championship reign, Jon Jones showed off that he had purchased a Bentley. This isn't an indictment on Jones's character, as many professional athletes will showcase the vehicles or houses they obtain once they reach the pinnacle of their athletic careers. What was an indictment on Jones's character was that in May of 2012, that Bentley would be seen crashing into a telephone pole, and that Jones had been arrested for a DUI.
I think they trust that I'll never make them look bad. You know, you'll never have to worry about me in a DWI or doing something crazy.
The accident happened during early morning hours, and Jones had 2 female passengers in the car with him. Keep in mind that Jones already had a fiancée and children at home. While Jones got off on a 6-month license suspension slap on the wrist, Jones' image took another severe hit and seemed to validate a lot of what Rashad Evans had been saying about him. While Jones was quickly becoming unequaled in his dominance inside the cage, outside of it was quickly becoming a completely different story. Thankfully, another opportunity to gain some good faith with the fanbase would be right around the corner, as his title fight with Dan Henderson was booked for August of 2012 at UFC 151, a chance for Jones to showcase he had grown from personal adversity, and that his dominance would not be wavered by his personal woes. This would be where Jones turned it all around. Even back in 2012, the UFC 151 card was seen as very lacking, with the only other fight of intrigue being the co-main event between 2 top 10 welterweights in Jake Ellenberger and Josh Koscheck. But both of them were coming off of number 1 contender losses, and even that ended up not mattering, as Koscheck pulled out with an injury. And another fighter on the main card didn't even have a Wikipedia page. This card lived and died off of the intrigue of that Jones and Henderson main event. And a few weeks before the card was scheduled to take place in August of 2012, trouble was already brewing. Dan Henderson had suffered a knee injury and originally attempted to train through it, but at nearly 42 years old, Dan's recovery wasn't what it used to be. With less than 2 weeks till the card's scheduled date, the UFC had to find a replacement for Dan Henderson, and the only man willing to take on Jon Jones on 8 days' notice was Chael Sonnen. Coming off of a fairly dominant loss to Anderson Silva, but we all know what happens next. Jones refused to take the fight. Could Dan have contacted the UFC and alerted them earlier about his injury? Of course. Was Jones well within his right to refuse to fight Sonnen on such short notice? Most certainly. But the nature in which Jones went about it, and how the UFC responded, well...
For the first time in 11 years, we're going to cancel an event. One thing that I never thought in a million years would happen, happened. Jon Jones said, I'm not fighting Chael Sonnen with 8 days notice. Now, I literally just bumped, I'll go on the record, Greg Jackson the other day, and I was kind of joking around about some of the things I said. I'll tell you what, I'll go on the record saying, this guy is a sport killer, okay?
Hey, Dana, I know it's the heat of the moment, but how much does this situation possibly change your relationship with Jon Jones?
A lot.
Awesome, thanks.
Thank you.
While Jon's coach, Greg Jackson, received the bulk of White's wrath, Jones' character and status amongst the MMA fanbase was questioned by White, who reiterated what a lot of them were already feeling about Jon Jones as a person.
Jon Jones has been one of these guys who, you know, as much as you know, he's won in all the things that he's accomplished in a short amount of time. Like, he burst onto the scene a year and a half ago. He's ripped through the top guys. He's been a champion that hasn't been very popular, you know, and I don't think that this is going to do wonders for his popularity.
We will never truly know the full reasons as to why Jones refused to fight Sonnen. Was it because Jones felt he truly didn't have enough time to prepare for Sonnen's style? Maybe. He did suspect that Sonnen trained with Henderson since they came from the same camp, and Sonnen might have known about his injury previously. But would anyone put it past Jones, whom at the time had such a challenging image problem, that the very idea of a possibility that Chael Sonnen of all people would beat him on short notice fill him with such existential dread that he couldn't bear it? Especially considering how he handled the recent Tom Aspinall situation, it's worth a discussion. So, how did Jones respond to the scathing criticism of his person by President Dana White? He compared himself to a Christ figure and apologized for the company's actions, and then proceeded to call Dan Henderson an old man. Oh, Jon, again, you were so close. This was the moment when Jones fully lost control of his good guy narrative, when he realized that he didn't have the UFC unconditionally on his side, that at the end of the day, he was just another name on the roster. While Jon continued to win fights, after the phone press conference and cancellation of UFC 151, there was no fully going back to the way Jon wished he was portrayed as, and little by little, Jon's descent into darkness became stronger and stronger as the good guy mask continued to crack and crumble. Jon Jones, as he wanted himself to be seen, died after UFC 151 was cancelled, and we as MMA fans had to bear witness to it. Would this troubled path in Jon's life and career still happened if he accepted the Chael Sonnen fight? Most likely, but there's always a chance. Jones taking the Sonnen fight on short notice while risky would have painted Jones in a much needed positive light, given the past year the generational talent had. Jones would have been seen as a card savior by the UFC brass and the fan base. Could he have carried that momentum to a much brighter place rather than slowly slip into the purgatory of legacy he has now? We'll truly never know. When Jon entered the UFC, he was the chaotic and mysterious genius that Heath Ledger's Joker was presented as, but now, as time passed, Jon is more in common with the Joaquin Phoenix take.
Everybody is awful these days. It's enough to make anyone crazy.
You know I would absolutely kill you if you ever did something like that,
You
right?
could never kill me.
I'm not talking to Jon Jones. I'm not talking to him, and there's no reason for us to talk.
They think that we'll just sit there and take it like good little boys.
Fucking officers, I fucking hate you. I hate you.
There's just one thing Jon failed to realize and capitalize on. There is a reason why 2019's Joker had such a following, and Jones nearly captured it for a brief window. 2019's Joker was painfully relatable, and every time Jon got close to gaining popularity by embracing his flaws, notably during the build-ups to both Daniel Cormier fights, he would then just as quickly act in such a totally unjustifiable or self-centered way that came across as immature and unrelatable. The director of the 2019 Joker film completely fumbled the character he created as well, making a contrarian musical sequel to the film in 2024, which was loathed by both critics and fans of the first film as well. The first Joker film brought in over $1 billion at the box office on a budget of $55 million, making it one of the most purely profitable movies of the year. The sequel had a budget of close to $200 million and barely broke even. Like Jones, sometimes you don't really know what it is you have until it's gone. And if you ask the average hardcore MMA fan these days, they'd probably prefer if Jones just went away at this point. But one man who ended his career the best way he possibly could was Dan Henderson. Dan Henderson would continue to compete in MMA till the end of 2016, at 46 years old. While he lost more fights than he won, every time he thought he was finished in the sport, he'd come back to add another crazy highlight to his reel. He won another barn burner in a rematch against Shogun, he KO'd Hector Lombard with a vicious standing backward elbow, and best of all, ended his career with, granted a very undeserved, title shot rematch against the man he gained a lot of his fame off of in Michael Bisping, who is having his own Cinderella story in 2016. Many expected the much younger man in Michael Bisping to completely dominate Henderson at this phase of his career. But Henderson proved everybody wrong, rocking Bisping numerous times in the fight and rearranging the Brit's face. But unlike their first fight, Bisping survived Hendo's H-bomb and utilized volume and movement to win an extremely closely contested fight against Henderson. While Dan didn't get to retire holding one final belt from the world's premier fighting organization, the account of himself that he made in his second tenure with the company was enough to firmly cement Hendo's legacy as not only a pioneer of the sport, not only a multi-divisional, multi-promotional champion, not only a provider of one of the best fights of all time in his first fight with Shogun, but as a very human and relatable figure in our sport, something that is becoming increasingly rare today. the kind of finale that Jon Jones to this day continues to search for. In December of 2016, while Jones was serving one of his suspensions, he competed in a grappling match with a freshly retired Dan Henderson at Submission Underground 2. While the two pretended to throw strikes, it was a low-pressure, zero-stakes affair that saw Jones submit Henderson in fairly quick fashion. And while the two men followed two very different paths in their careers and personal lives, it was nice to see this crossroads event close out with hugs and smiles, rather than the killing joke its initial cancellation had caused. Jon Jones, as he wanted us to know him, truly died that fateful day in August of 2012, but his story did not. Nor did Dan Henderson's. And at the end of the day, it's all we as MMA fans could ask for.